Princess Naira sat in her private research chamber, the holographic displays surrounding her with ancient texts and historical data. The topic of today's study was something that always amused her: humans according to galactic records. Humans were once an ambitious species that had mysteriously disappeared long ago. Some scholars claim they had been wiped out in a war. Others believe they had simply failed to keep up with the more advanced civilizations of the galaxy. Zyra, like most of her kind, found the idea of humans laughable. How could a species made of fragile flesh and bone ever hope to match the power of the great alien empires? The old story spoke of humans as warriors, strategists, and survivors. But to Zyra, they were nothing more than exaggerated legends, bedtime tales meant to entertain the young. She smirked as she read an old account of a so-called human admiral who had once threatened the entire galactic. "I see Dominion ridiculous," she muttered. "No species could have done this," and simply vanished without a trace. Her research was interrupted by a sudden beeping from her control panel. She frowned. The ship scanners had detected an anomaly in deep space, just outside the boundaries of the known trade routes. The energy signature was strange, ancient, yet active. Zyra raised an eyebrow. "This is interesting." She commanded the ship's AI to cross-check the signature with all known databases. The result sent a shiver through her. The readings matched old human warship blueprints. "No, that's impossible," she whispered. She turned to her crew, who were also staring at the data with confused expressions. One of them, a young officer named Kren, chuckled nervously. "Princess, this must be an error. The humans are extinct. Their ships were destroyed centuries ago. There's no way this can be real." Tyra nodded. "Of course, it must be a glitch, but humor me. Send a probe to investigate." Within minutes, a small reconnaissance drone was launched toward the source of the anomaly. As it approached, the ship's readings became more unstable. Strange interference filled the screens and the drone's cameras flickered. Then the images cleared. Zyra's breath caught in her throat. There, floating silently in the darkness of space, was a colossal warship, unlike anything she had ever seen. Its hull was blackened with age, yet it looked fully intact. No lights blinked on its surface. No transmissions came from within. It was as if the ship itself was watching them, waiting. Kren's voice shook. This can't be real." Zyra tried to convince herself. It was a derelict, a lifeless husk, drifting in the void, but her instincts screamed otherwise. Something about the ship felt wrong, as if it did not belong in this era. Then, without warning, the warship powered up. Lights flickered to life across its surface. The darkness surrounding it was pierced by the eerie glow of red energy lines running along its hull. The ship was not abandoned. It was awakening. A sudden deep hum vibrated through the probe speakers, like the growl of a sleeping beast disturbed from its slumber. The energy reading spiked. And then, for the first time in recorded history, a message came through, deep, chilling, and unmistakably human. "You should not have come here." Zyra felt her body turned cold. The myths were wrong. Humans were never extinct. They had simply been waiting. Zyra's hands trembled slightly as she stared at the words flashing on her screen. The deep voice that had spoken those chilling words still echoed in her ears. The crew aboard her ship sat frozen in their seats, their eyes wide with shock and confusion. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be possible. The humans were gone, wiped out from existence centuries ago. She tried to steady her breathing, forcing herself to act rationally. Perhaps this was a trap set by some rogue faction trying to intimidate them. Maybe it was an old automated defense system, replaying an ancient warning. Yes, that had to be it. The alternative was simply too unbelievable to consider. "Open a channel," she ordered, her voice firm, despite the cold dread creeping into her chest. The communication officer hesitated, his fingers hovering over the console. "Princess, are you sure?" Zyra shot him a sharp glance. "We must establish contact. If this is an automated system, we need to confirm it. If it's something else, we need to know." The officer swallowed hard and obeyed. A soft chime signaled the connection attempt, but no response came. The warship remained eerily silent. "Try again," she commanded. Before the officer could react, the ship's lights flickered, and the main control panel shut down. The entire bridge was bathed in dim emergency lighting. A murmur of panic swept through the crew as every screen on the ship went dark. Zyra felt her stomach twist. "Report." The chief engineer's voice was frantic. "Princess, it's like something is inside our systems. Our power is being routed. We're locked out of our own controls." A cold sweat formed on Kyra's brow. Inside, no force in the galaxy could hijack a Dominion ship this quickly. Their firewalls were the most advanced in the known universe. Whoever or whatever was behind this was using technology far beyond anything they had encountered than the darkness on their screen shifted. A new image appeared. It was grainy at first, like an old recording, but the outlines of a room became visible. It was a command deck not unlike their own. But what stood in the center made Cyrus' heart pound. A man. His uniform was old, the design long forgotten in galactic history. His posture was rigid, his eyes sharp, piercing. He stood tall, commanding. And despite the faded quality of the image, the intensity in his gaze was unmistakable. He was human. The crew gasped. His Urus fingers dug into the armrests of her chair as she tried to comprehend what she was seeing. This had to be a recording, an ancient transmission from the past. But then the man moved. He lifted his head and looked directly at them. Zyra's blood ran cold. This wasn't a recording. The human took a step forward, and when he spoke, his voice was clear, steady, filled with authority. "You do not belong here." A ripple of fear spread through the bridge. Zara forced herself to remain composed. "This is Princess Skyra of the Dominion flagship Fexus. You are trespassing in protected space. Identify yourself." The human tilted his head slightly, as if amused. "You call this space protected? You do not understand, or you are Seta." Clenched her jaw. "You claim to be human. That is impossible. Humans were wiped out from the galaxy over 1,000 years ago." For a brief moment, the man said nothing, then a slow smile spread across his face, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of someone who knew something she didn't. "Is that what your history tells you?" he asked. Zyra felt a cold pit in her stomach. "It's what we know." The human's expression darkened. "Then you know nothing." Before she could respond, the warship outside began to move. It turned ever so slightly, its weapons still powered, but not locked onto them. Instead, its engines flared with energy, unlike anything they had ever recorded. The ships suddenly came back online, blaring a warning in the Dominion language. "Unidentified T agent of D immediate R2. She needed answers. What happened to humanity?" she demanded. The human on the screen studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "They call this myths. They called us extinct. But we did not die. We became something far worse." And then the transmission cut out. The warship vanished into the void without a trace, leaving Syrah and her crew in stunned silence. Zyra sat frozen in her command chair, her heart pounding. As the transmission cut out, the bridge remained silent, each crew member staring at the dark screen, where the human had just spoken. The impossibility of what they had witnessed clashed with everything they knew about history, about the galaxy, about reality itself. Humans were gone, wiped out by the Dominion's ancestors, long before her time. They were nothing more than cautionary tales, myths meant to remind the galaxy why war should never be waged lightly. And yet one had just stood before her eyes, alive, speaking, commanding a ship unlike any she had ever seen. "Find them," she barked, breaking the stunned silence. "Track their movement, scan every sector of this region, locate them at warship now." Her crew scrambled into action, hands flying across their consoles. But the reports came back just as quickly. Nothing. The human ship had vanished from their sensors as if it had never existed. Exit refused to accept that scan for residual energy signatures. Their engines flared before they disappeared. "There must be something left behind." One of the officers hesitated before responding. "Princess, there is nothing. No ion trails, no warp distortions, no quantum echoes." It's like his voice faltered, like they were never here. Zyra's hands tightened into fists. No ship could vanish without a trace, not even the most advanced Dominion stealth technology. Even cloaked ships left behind subtle distortions, ripples in space that could be detected with the right instruments. But the human warship, the ghost ship, had left nothing. The reality of the situation pressed down on her, a crushing weight of fear and uncertainty. "Then, where did they go?" she asked, her voice quieter, now laced with something unfamiliar. Nobody had an answer. Her second in command, a seasoned warrior named Arvik, stepped forward cautiously. "Princess, we need to consider the possibility that this encounter was not a mere anomaly." She turned to him, sharply. "Explain." Rallick hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "The legends of humanity are old, older than our own empire. They were not merely warriors, they were monsters on the battlefield, capable of destruction beyond comprehension. We believe they were destroyed. But what if they were not?" He glanced at the now black screen. "What if they have been watching us all this time?" A cold shiver ran down Syrah's spine. The thought was absurd, impossible. And yet there had been something in the human's eyes, a depth and awareness that did not belong to the long-lost remnants of a dead race. He had not looked at them with the curiosity of a species rediscovered, nor the confusion of one that had been forgotten. He had looked at them with recognition. The realization struck her like a physical blow. We were the ones watching the stars for threats, she murmured. But we were the ones being watched. A heavy silence settled over the bridge, as her words stank in. If this was true, if humans had survived, if they had simply chosen to remain hidden all this time, then the question was not how they had returned, but why now. Her mind raced through possibilities. Had they been gathering strength, waiting for the right moment? But for what revenge? Power, princess? One of the censor officers suddenly spoke up, voice tense. We have something. It's weak. But it wasn't. There before C's head snapped toward him. What is it? A signal, barely readable, a single transmission, but not directed at us. It was sent from the human warship before it disappeared. Her breath caught. Can you decode it? The officer hesitated, then nodded yes. But you won't like what it says. Zur gritted her teeth. Put it on screen. The message was simple. Phase 1 complete, awaiting orders. The silence on the bridge deepened into something heavier, something close to dread. Phase 1. Awaiting orders. Who were they waiting for? C's mind spun with implications, each one worse than the last. If this was only the first phase of whatever the humans were planning, then the galaxy was standing on the precipice of something far greater, far dead earlier than anything they had ever imagined. Rallick exhaled slowly. It seems they were never gone, they were simply waiting. Zyra's grip on the armrest tightened. And now they had begun. Zyra felt the weight of the message pressing down on her like a crushing force, her mind racing to decipher the terrifying implications behind those 4 simple words. Phase 1 complete, awaiting orders. Because if this truly was only the beginning, then what exactly had the humans been waiting for all this time? And more importantly, who had they been waiting for? The very idea that humanity had not only survived, but had also remained hidden, watching from the shadows, while the galaxy moved on, scent and unshakable. Chill through her bones, because the question was no longer whether they were back, but whether they had ever left at all. And if they had been preparing in secret for this very moment, then the Dominion was already at a disadvantage in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. Her thoughts were interrupted as the bridge officers frantically scanned their systems for any trace of where the human warship had gone. But despite their best efforts, the vessel had seemingly vanished into nothingness, leaving no detectable energy signature, no lingering radiation, no trace of hyperspace distortions, absolutely nothing, as though the ship had existed only in a nightmare, a phantom from the past conjured into reality for mere moments, before slipping away like a ghost into the void. Arvik, standing stiffly at her side, with his usual stoic expression, barely concealing his unease, finally spoke in a voice lower than before, his gaze fixed on the black void beyond the viewport, as though expecting something else to emerge from the darkness at any second, saying, Princess, if humans have been hidden all this time, if they've been preparing for something, then we have to consider the possibility that this message wasn't just meant for them. It was meant for us as well, a warning we don't yet understand, and a message to whoever else is out there that we can't see. Syrah swallowed hard, gripping the edges of her command chair, because the thought that humans were still communicating with someone meant that their return was not an isolated event, not a single warship emerging from the void to haunt old legends, but the beginning of something far, far bigger, something that had been set into motion long before the Dominion had even realized it had lost control of the board. And if humanity had been planning this for centuries, then the Dominion wasn't facing a resurgence of an old enemy, it was facing a force that had already won before the first shot was fired. The communications officer suddenly stiffened his hand, shaking slightly as he hesitated, before turning toward her, his face pale, as he said, Princess, us, another signal just came through. But this time, it's directed at us. Syrah's stomach twisted, as she nodded for him to continue, her entire crew holding their breath as the message appeared on screen, a single chilling sentence from the long-lost humans that shattered any illusion that they had been forgotten, or that they had simply disappeared from history. The silence is over. We are here. Zyra could hear nothing but the sound of her own breathing, steady but strained, as the weight of the message settled upon her shoulders like an invisible force, pressing her down, her fingers gripping the armrests of her command chair, as if the metal itself could somehow anchor her in the face of the impossible reality unfolding before her. The bridge was silent, every officer frozen in place, all of them staring at the screen, where the message from the humans still burned into their minds. The silence is over. We are here. It wasn't just a statement, it was a declaration, a warning, Acclaim of return. Arvik, still standing beside her, exhaled slowly, his usual composure barely concealing the unease behind his sharp eyes. Princess, this is not the message of a people returning from exile. This is the message of a people who never truly left, he said, his voice low but firm, as if speaking any louder would shatter the fragile illusion that they were still in control. Zara swallowed her throat dry, as her mind raced, piecing together the implications. If the humans had been waiting all this time, if they had remained hidden watching, preparing, then what exactly had they been waiting for? Why now? Why reveal themselves at this moment? Before she could respond, the censor's officer let out a sharp gasp, his hands flying across his console, as a sudden alert blared through the bridge. Massive energy signature detected, he shouted, his voice laced with panic. Multiple sources, all appearing simultaneously. They are just appearing out of nowhere. The main viewport flickered, shifting to an external view of the battlefield beyond. And what Sira saw made her blood turn to ice. The darkness of space, once empty save for the distant glow of stars, was now crowded. Dozens, no hundreds of unknown warships had emerged from the void, their black hulls reflecting almost nothing, blending into the abyss, as though they had risen from the very shadows themselves. They were not Dominion ships, they were not from any known fleet, and yet their presence radiated a silent, overwhelming power. Their design sleek, angular, predatory, built not for defense, but for a singular, terrifying purpose. Rick's voice was barely whisper. They were never extinct, they were waiting for this moment. Zara felt her heart pounding, her claws digging into the armrest as the sheer magnitude of the truth crashed into her all at once. The humans hadn't simply returned, they had never been gone. And now, after centuries of silence, after being cast out and mocked as nothing more than myths, they had chosen this moment, this precise moment, to step out from the darkness, not as refugees, not as survivors, but as a force so vast, so terrifyingly prepared that their mere arrival had shattered the illusion of dominion. Control. In a single chilling instant, a transmission request came through, not a message, but a direct call. The humans were not hiding, they were reaching out. Zira forced herself to breathe, forcing herself to act, because whether she was ready or not, she was about to speak to a legend made real, and whatever happened next, it would determine the future of the entire Dominion. Zira's throat tightened as she stared at the incoming transmission request. The Dominion had always spoken of humans as a species long lost to time, a civilization that had faded away, leaving only ruins and stories behind. Yet here, they were very real, their fleet surrounding hers, with the silent promise of devastation. Should she make the wrong move? Her hand trembled as she reached forward, hesitating for just a second before pressing the control that would accept the transmission. The screen flickered, static buzzing for a brief moment, before clearing to reveal the figure on the other end. The man standing before her was unlike any being she had ever seen. His uniform was dark, pristine, bearing no insignia she recognized. But it was his eyes that unsettled her, the most cold, calculating, filled with an intelligence that seemed to weigh her very existence. In an instant he stood with the presence of someone who had no doubt in his authority, no hesitation, no fear. The bridge was so silent that Cra could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears as the human finally spoke. You should not have come here. His voice was deep, even carrying no anger, but something far worse, certainty. He was not making a threat, he was stating a fact. Zira struggled to find her words, her training as a diplomat, fighting against the primal instinct screaming at her to flee. This is Dominion territory, she managed to say, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. Your presence here is incorrect. The human interrupted, his expression remaining unreadable. You assume we ever left? Cy's breath caught that single statement, sent a cold wave through her. Her mind scrambled to process its implications. The Dominion had always believed the humanity had been wiped away, scattered, erased by the wars of old. But if what he was saying was true, if they had never left, then the entire history she had been taught was a lie. Arvik stepped forward, his voice carefully measured. Who are you? The human tilted his head slightly, considering the question before responding. A survivor, a soldier, a witness to history. His gaze bore into Sira before he added, and a reminder of what happens to those who forget it. The word sent a shiver down Sira's spine. She had spent her life believing that the Dominion was the peak of civilization, that all others were beneath them, that no force in the galaxy could challenge them. But the fleet outside, the ships that had appeared from nowhere, told a very different story. The humans were not merely remnants of an extinct people. They were something else entirely something, prepared the human continued, his voice calm. But unwavering, you called us myths, you laughed at our stories, you erased us from your records. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. But we did not forget you. Tia's claws tightened against the armrest, a flicker of unease passing through her. If humanity had never truly been gone, if they had simply been waiting, hiding in the shadow, then the Dominion had never actually ruled the galaxy. Unchallenged, they had been sitting in the center of a web, blind to the predator that had been watching from just beyond their reach. Arvik exchanged a glance with her, his own unease evident. What you want? For the first time, the human's expression shifted, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. To finish what was started, he said. Fyra felt the weight of those words settle over her like a crushing force. This was not a chance encounter. This was inevitable. The humans had waited, watched, prepared. And now, after centuries of silence, they had chosen this moment. This precise moment to return. The transmission, cut off outside the human fleet, began to move. A deep, eerie silence filled the bridge as the screen went black. Of Zyra's hands trembled slightly as she clenched them into fist verses, struggling to calm the storm raging inside her mind. The myths had been true. The humans had never vanished. They had watched, waited, hidden in the shadows, preparing for the moment they would return. Outside, the massive human warships moved with haunting precision, their formation shifting like a predator circling its prey. There was no hesitation, no unnecessary motion, only purpose. The Dominion fleet, which had once seemed invincible, now looked fragile, outmatched in every way. The bridge crew, Zyra's ship, sat frozen in place, their fear so tangible it was suffocating. Even Arvik, always the voice of reason, had no words. Then the first strike came. A silent flash erupted as one of the Dominion warships disintegrated in an instant. No warning shot, no demand for surrender, just obliteration. The ship's shields, designed to withstand the might of the Dominion's greatest enemies, had been useless. The human weapons tore through them like paper, reducing the once mighty vessel to nothing but debris floating in space. Panic erupted on the bridge. Officers shouted conflicting orders, desperate attempts to regain control. But Sarah knew deep in her gut that it was too late. This is impossible. Someone whispered, our shields, our defenses. How the answer was terrifyingly simple. The humans had never stopped evolving, while the Dominion had basked in its own arrogance, convinced that it ruled the stars. Humanity had spent centuries advancing in the dark, developing weapons far beyond what the Dominion had ever conceived. Another explosion rocked the void. A second Dominion battleship ceased to exist. The human ships did not miss their weapons, striking with pinpoint precision. There was no wild firing, no hesitation. Every shot was a kill. Zyra's mind raced. There had to be a way out, a way to reason with them, to stop this before the Dominion was completely erased. But what could she possibly say? Then, as if answering her unspoken thoughts, the human ship sent another transmission. She swallowed hard before opening the channel. The same human officer appeared, his expression unreadable behind him. Other humans stood at attention, their eyes cold and resolute. The Dominion stands at the edge of extinction. The human said calmly, your leaders will not surrender. They would rather see their empire burn than admit their failure. His gaze locked onto Syrah. But you have a choice. Her breath caught. A choice? What choice did she have? You can fight and die, the human continued, his voice unshaken. Or you can live to see a different future. Silence fell over the bridge. Every officer turned to her, waiting for her answer. She felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her, the burden of generations that had believed in lies. Could she betray the Dominion? Could she abandon everything she had ever known? Or was this not betrayal at all? Perhaps the real betrayal had been Dominion's to its people, to history, to the truth itself. Zur closed her eyes for a brief moment, drawing in a slow, shaky breath. When she opened them again, the fear was still there, but so was resolve. I choose to live, she said. The human officer nodded once, as if he had expected her answer. Then watch, he said, and outside the Dominion burned.